My name is Kelly Scarborough. I'm the Region 5 Director. I see a lot of the count going up pretty quickly here, so, but we do want to start on time since a lot of you are joining us during lunch, I think. So this is Sheila. She's a Senior Cost Analyst here at Quebec, and she has over 30 years of experience. She's a Certified Function Point Specialist as well, and we're really looking forward to her presentation today. So we thank you all for joining us, and just for the sake of being prompt and on time, we're going to go ahead and get started.
Tell them you're recording. You have to tell them.
Oh, and I also need to let you know that Megan has asked us to record this session, so we are recording, and if you could save your questions until the end, that would be awesome. Thank you.
Okay. So welcome everyone, especially our regional chapter folks on the West Coast. We're broadcasting out of Washington, D.C. We happen to be in the Quebec offices here in the D.C. area. So why can't we estimate better? Well, let's talk about this first. Why do we even care? Well, for several reasons. Simply stated, if you're running a business, then the profitability is based on generating goods and services at a known cost and then reselling them at a higher price. The difference between your success and your failure is dependent on how well you can manage the difference between the cost and the price, or in some cases it's budget and cost. But whether you're a government organization or you're commercial, all of us have an obligation to use our limited resources wisely in our own organizations and for our clients. Because that is the end result. Everybody has a limited amount of resources and they want to use it in the best way possible. So historically, predictable costs have been a real problem where goods or services include software. And that's going to be our focus today. Software estimating has been an ongoing problem for all of us for a long time. And what we're going to do today...
Hey, I'm getting a chat. Can anyone hear us? I'm getting a chat that somebody can't hear us here in the room.
We can hear you.
Okay. All right. I will message this person personally. Thanks, guys. Okay, go ahead, Sheila. Sorry for the interruption.
No problem. So what we're going to do today is we're going to look at some of the more prevalent issues and, some possible solutions. Okay, so we're going to talk about exactly what is an estimate. We're going to look at some of the key components so that we understand where the issues do arise. We're going to look at the reasons for those issues and from different perspectives, and then talk a little bit about best practices as we go through it as well. So one definition of an estimate, it is a disciplined process that requires quantitative data and qualitative knowledge with regard to the expected outcomes. It can also be viewed as a means to managing customer and management expectations. And there's a lot of people that just don't see it from that perspective, but if you can start to look at it from managing that customer or that management's expectations, some of the issues, the results from that tend to be clearer to understand and to come up with a solution. We all have to understand that and have people that we work with understand that an estimation is not a black box magic process from which a perfect or an absolute answer appears. In other words, an ETA, which is an estimated time of arrival, is an ETA, an estimated time of arrival. It's not an exact outcome. An estimate is just that. It's an estimate. Okay. So let's talk just a minute about estimation versus planning versus budgeting. Budgeting is going to define how much you have to spend, and that's going to influence your scope because that tells you what your potential resources are. The estimation is the rough or approximate size, extent, or nature of what you are trying to deliver, okay, or you are attempting to deliver. And then planning is you're actually defining the task, you're allocating your resources, you have your budget, etc. So some people tend to mix and match this particular verbiage, and we just want to make sure that we understand the differences here. Okay, so what are some of the basic methods? And what we're going to talk about today applies to any of these, but just for purposes of understanding, an analogy. Analogy is comparative, in which you're going to look at like projects with like characteristics, et cetera, like labor, and come up with a comparative estimate based on historical data from before or from an outside source perhaps. Bottom up. This is simply, you're going to start at the lowest level and estimate each individual piece at a lower level, and then add it up and bring it up to a total at the top. Parametric refers to using a tool or some other analytical methodology in which parameters are used to drive the results of that particular model. And iteration planning is more in the agile environment in which you have a backlog of user stories, other requirements that have to be implemented, and you plan how much goes into each iteration based on that selection from the backlog. Okay, what are the key components of an estimate? Well, it's really simple to understand and simple to state. You have quantitative data, qualitative knowledge, and those two things together actually make up the estimate. What's the quantitative data? Well, this is the things like the size and the effort, okay? And the bottom line is you may know how big this is going to be. You may have the labor to do it, but if you don't have the capability in your organization to handle that size, or the capability from a process perspective to be able to, we call that the capacity to deliver, then you're going to fail. So all of these are key pieces within it. So we've got, you can know the complexity of the particular project. You may even know the size and effort that goes into it, but you also have to have the capacity or capability to be able to be able to deliver. So let's talk about those three components separately here. So here's some examples of quantitative data. You know, obviously size can be in function points, it can be lines of code, it can be story points. Effort, labor hours, FTEs, man years, your labor rates, metrics data that you've collected from your project or team, like productivity rate, your delivery rates, sometimes line and code conversion, like from language to language, velocity or burn down rates, some schedule data. But all of this basically, most of this is based on historical data. And this is where we find the biggest gap. But let's continue here. So qualitative data. Now, how you can collect the qualitative data is generally through some kind of interview process, and it can actually be quantified by using a, say, questionnaire that has ratings for each of the answers. So, for example, if I'm talking about the tools and techniques available to developers, if you have everything that you need and it's top of the line technology, maybe you get a 5, and if you don't have everything you need but it will suffice, it maybe it's a 3, and so on. So I've seen many of these types of questionnaires, surveys, etc., that are used to actually quantify this type of information. And it's done with every project. But this is qualitative assessment of the delivery process, of the ability of the software development team to design, develop, and deploy a satisfactory solution. And if you don't have your own knowledge base of this information from other projects, then you can actually buy an automated tool to do this, or, you know, the databases are available commercially, okay? And usually it's aligned by industry type. So let's talk about the complexity side. This too is qualitative data. Okay? Hold on a second. Okay, complexity can have a wide variety of definitions in the, you know, in the marketplace, you know, in the industry. But basically we're talking about, are there a lot of logical and mathematical algorithms? What kind of data relationships are there? Are they complex or are they very simple? What kind of reusability do we have? Do we have memory issues or code structures? Is everything well maintained structurally in the code, or do we have the old-fashioned term spaghetti code, etc.? And performance requirements. Can we meet the performance requirements, or are we going to have to expand to get different hardware, etc.? Okay, so these variables and these other risk factors, okay, they can be gauged, okay? Typically we see these in a tool in the parameter section. So for example, the SEER tool has hundreds of particular parameters that you can set. Some will be set, I won't say permanently, but they stay the same all the time, but others are more variable. And there's sometimes the difficulty, if you're a new user to it, is in determining which of those elements you have to reevaluate every time with a different project, and then having a proper method for evaluating those particular elements. Okay, so this too can be done through, you know, through survey, through questionnaire, etc., providing that you have a well-defined process to capture that information. IT organizations that are effectively estimating their software projects, they're either using a commercial software estimating tool, which handles these parameters for you, okay, or they have historical data that they use to develop an accurate set of algorithms to compute a complexity value. And you're going to see this throughout the presentation because this basically historical data and or a commercial-based tool or a combination of both tend to be the most efficient use, the most efficient way to facilitate estimation. So let's get on to some issues. The reason that I focus on the data is for this reason. The number one reason for errant estimates is lack of data. Okay? You don't have the right data at the right time. It's not at the right level. It's not the right fit. Okay? It's not accurate. All right? Big one is timekeeping. You may not be able to estimate properly how many testing resources that you're going to need necessarily if you don't track the labor category as test. If it's just, oh, I've got 40 hours on a project, but you don't have it broken up by how much is spent on testing, how much is spent on design, etc., then you're basically guessing as to how much of that time is actually spent in those particular categories. Okay. Looking at your sources of data, is it a reasonable resource or source of data? I've seen And I'm speaking from experience here, meaning I've seen people use numbers and metrics from someone's book, for example, that basically doesn't have any fit to what they're trying to do. So, for example, trying to compare or use numbers from a web-based application or web-based metrics to apply to a middleware project, for example. There's a great deal of research that has gone into actually slicing and dicing different types of data out there, and I realize that you usually have to pay for it, but if you want you have to start somewhere, and if you want accuracy or you want to get a more reasonable effort estimate, then you're going to have to find things that are close to the description of what you have for your project. Now, with the historical data, and this is the key to how it's big data, is do you have the right analytics? Okay, do you have the experience, do you have the knowledge to be able to pull the right data from that, and the ability to pull it from that historical data? Okay. So let's move on. Okay, so some of the things that you can do if you're working with quantitative data and you want to mitigate some of those, I want to say not just the lack of data, but the use of the data, is you can start by using what we call industry accepted data. However, again, make sure that it has the same characteristics as your project, or reasonably so, okay, so that you're doing correct comparisons. If you do have some quote-unquote solid data, at least some, then you can extrapolate that using confidence levels and using statistics. If it's not at the granular level needed, sometimes what you can do is work with your team members or your stakeholders to agree to percentage allocation. So, for example, if you know a certain amount of time has been spent on a specific project, you can come to an agreement as to what numbers you're going to use, which percent of it is PM time, how much percent of that effort was toward testing, etc. And there are even percentages out there in the industry that will give you suggestions for that. But you do need to start, if you need to start somewhere. Okay. You can scrub a questionable data set sometimes to cull a usable subset. Okay. Again, using some analytics or some statistics to look at that data and see how reasonable it is. We frequently do internet searches, and this is for like projects, for case studies that are out there, using, for other types of deliverables which are similar. Obviously, software costs, license fees, white papers. We needed to recently, we were looking at a transition between two different platforms, and we happened to find a white paper out there, a technical paper that someone had written that actually addressed the cost of going between two different platforms, and it was very helpful to us, and at least showing us what to consider when we were estimating that type of project. Hardware cost, if you need to do what I call a comprehensive cost model, because obviously other than just the software engineering type of estimate, you may have to include some hardware costs, etc. Build a library of estimation resources for you to use in the future. When you find things that are helpful, start a library that all of your estimators can use, okay, and share that information. And of course, number one thing, if you don't have one already, start a data repository of estimation and modeling data, okay? Reuse is a very important part of estimation, okay? Now let's talk about a few other major influences. So other apparent drivers, I'm going to call it that, fall within a variety of capabilities for building an estimation model. And this refers to our ability to make an estimation model, whether you're a cost analyst or a quote-unquote estimator or whatever your role may be. And I took all of these issues that came up and I broke them into three parts. One of them is a technical capability, one is a process capability, and one is an organizational capability. Those are the three categories. So let's talk about technical first. All right, so I've heard this one before. Anybody who can build an Excel worksheet thinks they can do an estimate. And yes, I've heard that. And they could be right. They may be able to do an estimate, but how well? Okay? And this falls back on how well do you know your subject matter? How well do you know your domain? Okay? Especially if you're doing cost modeling, because cost modeling, frequently cost modeling is actually made up of multiple little estimates within it. Okay? You may have a single line item that requires a detailed estimate, if you will, but then it feeds into the cost model at a bigger, just like we say, that if you're doing a full cost model, that the software engineering cost is a small part of that compared to the rest of the activities or the costs that are associated with implementing a specific project, specifically if it has a lot of hardware or upgrades or technical considerations to go with it. So in that kind of situation, it is very helpful for someone to know that domain. Okay? An example that was given to me was, a financial system cost model is not the same as a weapon system cost model. Okay? Makes it, how about a lack of analytical skills? I find that many people out there trying to estimate right there, they don't have the analytical skills that they need. And I don't mean necessarily mathematical analytical skills, but they don't have the skill to actually look and understand the different component interactions in the model to be able to spot if something is not quite right. Okay? So, and sometimes that comes with experience, and sometimes you can actually take a class in analytics, okay? But another one I've seen is being too dependent on a tool. Your tool is not omnipotent. In other words, the answer that comes out of it isn't golden, okay? You would love it to be, but you need to be able to understand how it works, because sooner or later someone's going to say to you, that doesn't look right. We know it's going to take more time than that. We know it's not going to take that amount of time, or whatever the number would be, or that cost is way too high. Can you recheck it? Well, you need to understand how it works. You need to understand the parameters that go into that tool so that you can either tweak it, or you can give them an explanation why, and perhaps your assumptions are not quite correct, or perhaps they've given you a different, a different view of it than what is really happening, or something of that nature. A tip to you that are either, whether you're experienced or not, is find a good mentor, okay? And mentor others yourself. This helps you, by mentoring others, you're going to find out what you don't know or help you cement what you do know. And, if you feel that you need more experience in it, try and find a good mentor that you can use as well, okay? Because there's nothing like experience. Okay. Okay, so let's talk about process capability. Here are some, I won't say these are the steps, okay, in estimation, but there's certainly process areas, if you will, okay, sub areas, okay. definition, collection, sizing, doing your comparisons, your quality checks, your analogies, and then your reporting. And in each one of these, you should be able to have some, I'm going to say, some documented processes so that everyone is at least doing them at a certain consistent level, as well as you want to have some cross-checks between different estimators and so on. So if we go back to the SEI, which is the Software Engineering Institute, a viable process should be documented, practiced, validated, trained, and measured. That's the big 5, okay? So if you don't have this documented process where you're at, and everybody is more or less doing their own thing, then you can come up with inconsistent data across the organization, and it can create some differences in either, they could create some criticisms, let me say that, across different groups and so on, okay? One of the things that's helpful is to actually build a cost center of excellence, in which, you know, that you do have a viable process that everybody can use, that's tailorable. We're not saying it'd be a rigid process, okay, but that everybody can understand and be trained on appropriately for whatever level that they're at. So Deming said that 85% of the reasons for failure are deficiency in the systems and the process rather than the, I'm going to say, estimator, okay? If you can't describe what you are doing as a process, then you don't know what you're doing, okay? So let's assume that you have an estimation process that exists, and it is being used, at least it's being used consistently. Then here are some potential areas of improvement, okay, or things that we found that in a process may be lacking, so to speak. You don't do risk analysis, okay, or it's inadequate. Constraints and assumptions are not addressed. I call this the looking through rose-colored glasses syndrome. Everything, once you produce an estimate, it's all, you know, it's all perfect, so to speak, and it's going to be just fine from now on, and so on and so forth. It's better to address all those risks and constraints up front so they're understood, whether you believe they're going to happen or not, okay? And these things aren't captured for future lessons learned either. Requirements are not clearly defined, complete or understood, and therefore, since your scope is based on your requirements, the estimate is off because it doesn't have the proper scope. There are little to no checks or balances, internal reviews or audits, or comparisons to outside data. It is always good to have a check and a balance. In other words, run 2 models, okay? Do some what-ifs. Things like that, okay? No buy-in from management. Now, and I'm saying this because this is a process issue as well as a culture issue, but this is a process issue in the sense that sometimes you don't get buy-in from management because of how the estimates are built and delivered or presented. In some cases, you have to be somewhat, I won't say of a salesperson, but you have to be the type of person that can present it in such a way that it makes sense to management and understand where they are coming from. If you are in the commercial world, then it's the bottom line. It's how does it affect the bottom line, okay? All right? In the government, it's how can I get this done within the budget that's allowed, okay? So no allowances. The next one is no allowances for re-estimation when circumstances change. okay? Things will change. You have to allow for re-estimation and adjustments, okay? Little to no data captured to support the estimation activities or cost loss. You have to have data if you're going to show how much loss you actually incurred when you do cost overruns and typical things like that. You have to collect the metrics, collect the data, and store it, not only for present, but for future. And then obviously, bureaucracy. Your processes may simply be too cumbersome, okay? And that goes along with that's the typical process improvement type activities. If you can get management to help support some of those, then you can perhaps show a return on investment on your process improvement activities, which basically is the only way you get them to agree to it. Okay, so let's talk about organizational capability. Now this equates to culture, okay? For me, the organizational capability is the ability to foster good estimation practices, and some organizations simply don't have the culture to do that. They're dysfunctional from a process perspective. Some of them are directed, not cooperative environments. Some of them have exactly the opposite. They have processes. I went into one company where the processes were beautiful, but they had no responsibility or accountability for them, so therefore they sat there and they were dead. They were not really used well, okay? Poor change management, okay? And this, again, is a result of culture. Change is not welcome. Every time something changes, something breaks, and they don't like it, etc. So poor estimation can easily be seen a result of organizational culture, and I'd like to go through 3 of the most frequent cultures that I have personally experienced, as well as what others in my field have experienced as well. So here they are. Number 1, estimation isn't our problem. We've got all kinds of other problems delivering, but estimation is not one of them, okay? And typically what happens with this is you have a typical schedule. If there's slippages or cost overruns, then they take immediate issues, they address it, new milestone schedules are created, etc., and eventually they will deliver, okay? Upon delivery of the software, if it's significantly late or over budget, then they hold a post-implementation review to see what went wrong, okay? At this point, if you look back over the project, you could see numerous things that may have contributed to it. Like in this case, it says unrealistic schedule, ambiguous user requirements, etc. However, you rarely ever hear anyone identifying part of their inability to deliver as attributed to the inability to estimate properly. It's always a technical issue, or the fickle finger of fate, so to speak, is pointed at all the other reasons why it wasn't delivered, when the consideration partly should be, why didn't we deliver on time, on schedule, which brings into, well, maybe the estimate was not right, and how can we do this better, okay? So, have you ever heard anyone say, but we did everything right? Or, I don't know what we could have done differently. Now, I've heard this. And what that boils down to is the team did everything right to deliver. The estimation was simply wrong. But yet they would not admit it was the estimation model that was wrong. Now, if you don't admit, and quite frankly, if you don't admit that you have a problem with estimation or that it attributes to the poor delivery of software, then you're not going to improve it, because the first step towards improvement is to recognize that you have a problem. Okay? So that's one of the first ones. It's a biggie. I want it delivered right now. This is a directed type of environment. And this dynamic shows that management, they really don't want that estimate at all. You're checking a box, and they just want it delivered when they want it delivered. This is the situation when they say, I want this, and it could be, like this says here, the marketing group, a business user, senior management, and they've requested a software solution, but they've already given you a fixed delivery date. Rather than saying, we need to have something out there on the market by a certain delivery date, what can we do by this date? Okay, that's totally different, okay? So even though they go through the motions of asking for an estimate, they really aren't interested in hearing the response unless they are told what they want to hear. They really don't want to hear the truth, okay? They don't realize the power of good estimation as a vehicle to properly manage the project or their customers' expectations or the amount of money that they are going to waste, okay, trying to meet a schedule that is forced upon a team, okay? And the cost may be in quality. Okay, it may not be just money, it may be quality, and that quality may cost them. It could cost them in customers, it could cost them, obviously in dollars and revenue as well. But unless that is proven to them, like I said, bottom line, then this type of approach will continue. Now, the third one is we don't have time to get the estimate right. Now, this is an organization that's somewhat caught between a rock and a hard place, okay? They want to improve their estimation capability. They're unwilling to make the resource investment to make the necessary improvements. So they may understand the value of properly estimating the project deliverables. They may even understand at some level what it would do to get it right. But they don't want to make the investment necessary to achieve the higher level of accuracy, and the perception is they don't have the time or the resources to get that right, but they end up taking that same time and resources to correct the problems resulting in part from the lack of proper estimating. Okay, it's a typical software process improvement conundrum, so to speak. They want to get it better, but they don't want to invest the time and resources to do it. The only thing that will move an organization like this is performing a cost analysis to show them that their ROI is going to help their bottom line, okay? Make things easier on everybody as well as improve their financial position. So, again, performing a cost analysis may well prove to themselves that the investment to improve their estimating model is well worth the effort. Can you do this internally? Usually not. Usually you have to hire an outside resource to come in and do that type of benchmark, okay? Because typically they won't listen to the internal people, they will listen to an outside source, okay? This is the last slide. So, some more best practices. Number one, and we've talked on this many times here, a historical database of quantitative and qualitative data for you to draw upon in your estimation models. Secondly, structured processes for estimating the product size and reuse. Okay? Mechanisms for exploiting or extrapolating benchmark characteristics of past projects. And this is you're using your analytics. Okay? Audit trails. For any number of reasons. Integrity in dealing with dictated costs and schedules. Telling the truth whether they want to hear it or not, okay? That's all part of being an estimation quote-unquote champion, okay? Data collection and feedback processes to foster correct data interpretation, okay? And this is all part of having that that good, that culture of cooperation, and that encourages feedback and, positive reinforcement and so on. So the way that they put this in the book is that project managers reference historical data points for similar project types, calculate estimates based on known parameters, and statistical calculations of risk. The actuals are recorded and stored for use in future estimates. Okay. And I don't know where we stand, but this is just references. So, okay. Any questions? Mm-hmm.
And keep in mind, everyone's muted right now, so even if you didn't think you were, I muted you at the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, thank you, Sheila. I appreciate everyone who attended today. Region 5 is really starting, from a difficult place in terms of building up our community and getting started. So it really takes a village. So for everyone who joined, regardless of what region you're in, we're happy to have you. And if you happen to be in Region 5 and you're interested in helping us build content and host virtual lunch and learns and kind of get things moving, please contact me. Again, my name is Kelly Scarborough. And yeah, again, thank you, Sheila, so much.